June 18th meeting of the Water and Wastewater Commission. I'll now call the meeting to order. Please be advised that FATV is conducting audio and video recording of the meeting for public broadcast. If anybody in the audience is recording this meeting, please identify themselves. For the record, state your name and city of residence. This time I'll ask that all electronic devices be put in silent mode. And let's see. Do we need a roll call, or is nobody's? We don't need a roll call, do we? Or do we?
Probably should do a roll call.
Okay, let's see. We'll do a roll call. Nick Erickson?
Here.
Gary Withington?
Here.
George Cena? Here. Joe Byrne?
Here.
Mike McLaughlin?
Here.
Jason?
Here.
Efforts? And Rick Haley here. Is anyone here to speak? I see no one, so we'll get right into the meeting. At this point, John, wastewater?
Yep. We'll have minutes for you at the next meeting. We don't have them from the last meeting.
Water.
So
I'm sorry, water.
That's all right.
I do that every month.
Yeah, as you're aware, we're going to have a presentation from Weston and Sampson on an assessment that was done of the regional and Falulah water treatment plants. This is Sam Kenny from Weston and Sampson. When we were looking at, a previous capital improvement plan that we did a couple of years ago with the rate study, we knew that there was some stuff that needed to be done at the regional plant, which is now approaching 30 years old. But when we started looking at the pieces that needed to be done, we determined it was better just to put it together with one project to basically save money. All historic needs to be done. A lot of it needs to be coordinated because there's extended plant shutdowns that'll be needed. And it's just best to do it all and, make sure it's ready for another 30 years. But there's a lot to consider when we're looking at that too, because we have new regulations, that are we have to deal with that are pending, like the PFAS regulations, which we'll touch upon. So we have to take that all into consideration too. So that's why we decided let's do an overall assessment, see if there's anything we can do as far as changing treatment, make it more efficient, and also make sure that we're, looking ahead at, new regulations and what we need to do to meet those. And some of these improvements are to meet the new regulations in addition to make the plant reliable again. Like I said, there's the plant's approaching 30 years old. It runs 24/7. I mean, there's a few periods when it was down for a few hours, but it runs 24/7, 365 for that. And, systems wear out. We have a couple filters that are down. We don't use as much water as we used to, despite, supplying all of Fitchburg as well as Westminster. So we're at probably about 80% capacity on the plant, but it was a 12 MGD plant, and we're only using like 5 or 6, max during the summer. So, but we still want to make sure that, we keep these things up, and we need to do the filters and clarifiers over, which was, including that capital improvement plan from a couple of years ago. But CM's going to go, it's been, a few months of looking at all the systems here, determining what needs to be upgraded, determining where efficiencies can be made. We want to try to save as much money possible, and Sam will talk about some of those areas. That we can do that with, upgrading a system, but also looking toward making, something more efficient. And it's a different, as Sam will talk about, it's a different world than when this plant was built. Heating oil, which was very cheap back then, and nobody gave any thought to it getting as expensive as it has, although hasn't been too bad. But or realizing how cheap natural gas has gotten, over the last few years instead of keep going up. So there's some alternatives there we can do for heating at one of the plants, but. Anyways, I'll pass it off to Sam, and he can go through his presentation, and we can get copies of it to you afterwards as well. So, all right.
Welcome, Sam.
Thanks for letting me be here tonight. I'm going to try to keep this to like 10 minutes, then get to Q&A, have a little interactive session, and I'll keep trying to move my head a little bit. I'm not used to like a full 90 degrees on a presentation here. But yeah, John gave a great kind of introduction here, but I'm going to go over some of the specific improvements that we're talking about and identifying here, both at regional and at Falulah. And really that started with, the water treatment plant assessment effort that we've been conducting with the city for the last, 9 to 12 months here. effectively the primary purpose of that assessment is looking at the processes and the actual treatment, both at regional over in Westminster as well as the Falulah plant up on Ringe Road, and looking at the need for upgrades at both of these facilities. Right off the bat, just want to acknowledge that both of these facilities are sitting at an inflection point that's extremely common when we talk about, water and wastewater treatment infrastructure. Of really 20 to 30 years is the useful life and the expected useful life of a lot of primary treatment components. So both of these facilities are sitting right at that time period. So the planning right now is well timed. It is expected at this interval. And we're talking about, looking both at the processes for treatment, but also the buildings themselves. Like John said, doing a holistic project, trying to take these on and really upgrade these facilities and kind of renew that expected useful life at this point. And also we'll get into a minute, but it's a changing landscape. Regulatory requirements are changing. There's lots of other considerations now that did not exist when these plants were designed. So the city is doing what it can to keep up with those. Part of the process now is also providing capital planning to ultimately go and address some of those changing regulations. So the whole point of this assessment process is really to ultimately identify and recommend both a scope and a capital improvement number that can be carried forward for improvements at both of these facilities. So I'm going to touch on just one regulatory change, but when we talk about, the regulatory landscape shifting around the plants, just one specific instance is the information up on this slide, which is a recent change to the NIPD's discharge permit for the water treatment plants. These changes are changing how much aluminum can ultimately be discharged from the plant. The city uses an aluminum-based coagulant right now at regional. We just, as part of this study, did a bunch of trials. We're now looking at moving to, a ferric or an iron-based coagulant as an alternative to that process to meet this changing NIPD's regulation. And with that carries, a substantial change to the operation and maintenance that the city is paying for. So we're trying to look ahead at well under this capital improvement project and identify areas that we can, invest and make things, better, and also kind of tackle some of these things that have cropped up along the way. So diving into regional a little bit more, the facility is at that 30-year inflection point. That second bullet John touched on, but it's worth repeating. The treatment plant runs 24/7. It has not been offline for a full day since it went online. It is absolutely critical to the water supply of the city of Fitchburg, as well as the town of Westminster, which pulls all of its water directly from it as well. The city has been investing in this facility, just replaced the roof replacement of that facility, like within the last week. That project basically wrapped up. But again, we're at that inflection point where there's numerous treatment processes, there's numerous building systems that really need to be examined and brought up. And these repairs are really beyond the scope of operation and maintenance. They are significant efforts. One of them is up here on screen, but this is the primary stainless steel piping, the raw water piping into the facility that's starting to show signs of corrosion. So the takeaway from this slide is it's a very complex problem, and it provides or requires complex planning to ultimately pull this off in a way that maintains the functionality of this plant. A couple other items that we'll touch on, the filters themselves that are providing your primary treatment have reached the end of their useful life at regional. The generator is another item that has also reached that useful life. But like John talked about, there may be an opportunity here to switch to natural gas with the new unit. Kind of same concept with the boilers inside the plant itself. The assessment also took a look at and is kind of ultimately recommending a shift from chlorine gas over to a liquid sodium hypochlorite in the treatment process, which should result in a cost savings, improvement to the safety. It's easier for the operators to handle. I think the theme of the last 3 bullets is that as part of a capital investment, there's also a lot of opportunity for looking at increasing efficiency of how some of these systems work, improving safety, and lowering some of the overall O&M cost to operate these facilities.
And if I just interrupt for a second, when the plants were originally designed, chlorine gas was determined to be the least costly for disinfection. However, that's changed. I mean, part of it is just, the danger of it, realizing there's, terrorists out there or something like that, things that could happen. So now it's become more expensive to treat with. But the other thing is we have our operators working there. Any incident with chlorine gas, I mean, just a sniff of that and you'll be passed out. And if it is gas, I mean, death occurs within, 10, 20 seconds probably. So we really want to get away with that. That risk, was thought about back then, but, we need to be more cognizant of that. We've had a couple incidents over the years, not while I've been here, but previously where, somebody did get exposed and knocked out, right in there, just didn't realize the gas was there and it's heavier than there and falls down. So we look at this opportunity as like, well, let's make it a lot safer for them. It's going to be really less maintenance with the hypochlorite, and the savings that were with the chlorine gas back when the plants were done is no longer there. In fact, it's shifted. So chlorine gas, we're constantly maintaining the systems. There's air scrubbers in there. We have to file plans about, if there's a release of something. Some plants use larger tanks, 2,000, pound tanks. We have 150-pound cylinders, so our risk to the neighborhood isn't significant compared to some other places. But it's still there, for our employees that work there. So if we can get away with that, and my fear is that something happens at one of the chlorine gas plants or in transporting it. The next thing you know, these costs go through the roof. And a couple of years ago, there was a shortage. We weren't sure we were going to get chlorine gas. Hypochlorite, it's a whole different thing. So that's just an example of one of the things we looked at is that things have changed significantly since then.
Yeah, and kind of John touched upon this earlier, but too, the whole cost metrics of natural gas have completely shifted now. So, looking at including natural gas at this facility may be a significant change in the O&M as well. So we spent some time talking inside. Also want to kind of point out, some exterior improvements. But effectively, this project likely includes inclusion of a third lagoon. This is, again, really tied to that regulatory change of aluminum discharge. Moving to an iron-based coagulant is going to result in more solids production. So getting a third lagoon in here is going to increase that operational flexibility, the redundancy of the overall system. But again, just on that backdrop of regulatory changes causing capital change, this is a good example to show.
And as Sam mentioned, there's about $100,000 additional cost switching to the ferric-based coagulant, but that mitigates millions of dollars of improvements that would have been required here to remove the aluminum. So, we're spending $100,000 more a year, but we're saving a lot as far as this. We're still going to add a lagoon up there to help, with managing the residuals. The other thing we looked at is that, we take those residuals and bring them to the wastewater plant. Well, eventually Mark's not going to want the aluminum. He probably doesn't want it now. So we're trying to look out not just for us, but also for them too. I mean, we don't want to affect their operations and cause them to go over their permit. So that's the other thing that, the other part of this equation is that, we're looking, we don't want to, cause any additional costs for Mark either, because we still got to get rid of our residuals, whether they're, aluminum based or the iron based. So, but the overall savings will be significant, even though there's a $100,000 additional associated with this switch. So.
So shifting gears over to Falulah, but some of the same themes that we've really been talking about. Falulah is a little bit newer facility than regional, but it's also 20 years old, and the filters are 20 years old, and they've reached the end of their anticipated useful life as well. So targeting, a filter replacement as part of this work. The city's done a lot of work trying to combat, changes in water quality over the years by changing, operating procedures and things like that. But this provides an opportunity for the city to address some of those in a capital manner as well right now. The heating system at Falulah has been identified as something that needs, further study and modification. I think the water department's estimating up to 150 gallons of oil usage per day at Falulah. There's got to be a better way. So reduction of that fuel capacity, and again, the theme of can we use capital improvement to alleviate O&M cost? That's going to be a major goal of this. And then last bullet, again, is just the same concept of moving away from the chlorine gas and towards a liquid sodium hypochlorite for disinfection for all the reasons that we've talked about. So what's the overall takeaway? There's a lot of other improvements that we're rolling into this. Some of them are listed up here. We can kind of go into those, as you'd like. But that bottom line in red is in red for a reason. That is your primary takeaway. That is the CIP value that is currently in the Water Division CIP that's being used to inform the rate study update right now. It's $21 million price tag for improvements at both Regional and Falulah. I want to move on a little bit from that to.
You could just go back for a minute. Some of the other systems, we have a blower that does backwashing, that basically, used for backwashing and clarifiers and filters and things like that. That blower, there's only one at each plant, and we've had them repaired, rebuilt, and now it's time to replace them or, and we only have one, for each plant. I don't know why they didn't build redundancy, and there's not enough room to add to. Compressors there at each plant, they run the air valves that open and close. There's multiple, during a backwash cycle, there's, many valves that are opening and closing at the right time, and they're all actuated by air. So we had a compressor. One thing that was never built into the plants was redundancy. They should have put 2 compressors in each. We bought a backup compressor that we could bring to one plant or the other. Now that runs off gas, we'd have to put it outside to hook it up until we could get something repaired. But, we need to look at something a little better than just that, for the plants, so we don't have issues, because we actually had Falulah go down for a while because the compressor failed until we got another one in there and all connected in. So we want to make sure that we have that type of backup, because Falulah, it's okay to go down within reason. But the regional plant, you can't do it, because that supplies Westminster and most of the city, 2/3 of the city. We can also, with the regional plant, we can supply all the city. Falulah plant can't do the reverse. So when you want to look at some of these plants, and we realize there really should have been some redundancy and folded into the project that really aren't going to cost that much in the scheme of things, because it's been pretty stressful and worrisome when we were close to not being able to provide water to the city, or having to have a boil water order, which would have a huge economic impact. Great Wolf and places like that. So we want to make sure that we have this resiliency with these, some of these systems that, like I said, it's not very costly to add some redundancy to some of these things. So
just to kind of wrap up and go on top of the capital improvement costs that just got shown, something that we're always kind of looking at is that change in regulation and how changes being made, or what the regulatory landscape is, and how that affects investment, how that affects operation and maintenance. So the elephant in the room for water quality right now and water treatment is always PFAS. I'm going to talk a little about that right now. Just be aware this is still developing guidance. Right now, the EPA is looking to hold implementation of a 4 parts per trillion standard for both PFOA and PFOS. That's supposed to be effectively put into effect in spring of next year, which would take effect in 2031. So where does the city stand right now on the PFAS front? The most recent sample data is up there. I'm going to read it because I know it's a little small, but it's about 3 parts per trillion PFOA over at Regional, and about 1.6 in PFOS. For Falulah, it's about 1.5 parts per trillion PFOA, and currently non-detect on PFOS.
Oh, that's good.
So that is the current data. Historical trend generally supports that. This is not one data point that the city's hanging their hats on here. Your data has consistently been at these levels. You have consistently been below 4 parts per trillion. But again, in red, the takeaway from this slide is PFAS changes the equation greatly in terms of what you're talking about for capital expenditure. You're looking at about approximately $20 million additional expenditure per water treatment plant if PFAS becomes part of the equation. So just want to put that out there. There's also, additional O&M that comes with that. This is a picture of a full PFAS facility that's using both ion exchange resin and PFAS. There's a lot of equipment. There's a lot of operation that goes with it. So just drawing that this is not in the $21 million number right now. Your data that you have historically seen and your current data is putting you below that. But it's worth acknowledging, and it just needs to be said at this time.
And those are small vessels compared to what we would require. I mean, ours would be significantly larger because of the flows. So, but that's the real takeaway. It's $20 million per plant to treat for PFAS. We're talking our project is $21 million, and we don't, this isn't anything we're considering at this point. And hopefully we can stay below those levels. We'd love to. I'd love to, for our customers and the residents of Fitchburg as well as Westminster, remove all the PFAS from there. But it's not feasible with this type of cost. I mean, it would be the rates would just. It would be a large increase. And then the capital. You got the capital cost, but then there's O&M, switching out either the granulated active carbon or resin, and all the work that's associated with that. And then we'd have to pump everything through there. Right now at the regional plant, once it runs through all the filters and clarifiers, goes into the clear well, it flows gravity down the city. Well, that wouldn't happen. We'd have to take the water from the clear well, pump it through all these things to treat it, and then allow it to then flow down to the city. So we'd be pumping all the city's water, all of Westminster's water, every day versus having a gravity system. So the costs are tremendous. We hope that we, like Sam said, historically this is what we've been seeing, around 3 or so at regional and lower at Falulah. So hopefully that continues to be the case. So, and while we're on the subject of PFAS, it wasn't strictly in there. I will add, we under the previous city solicitor, we got into a class action lawsuit because of the 3M settlement with PFAS. We did receive a settlement. It's $300,000 and some change, just because of these slow levels and because we haven't treated. If we were treated, it would be significantly more. But we either tried to grab some of it or not get any of it. So that was the advice that was taken. But we just got this. We got the first installment. Of course, after the attorney's fees, it's down to a little over, 100,000 is gone. So it's a little over 200,000. So, but you look at the scale. If we were to go over, look at the costs compared to what we actually got out of the 3M settlement. And I'm actually surprised we got that much because our levels have been low. We haven't had to treat. So, but that just kind of puts it into perspective. It's like, this huge settlement, class action lawsuit with 3M, they agree to this. We get 300,000, of course, less with the attorney's fees. But if we did have to treat, this is what the city of Fitchburg would be facing. So the fortunate thing is we've protected, the watershed, all the work that we've done, protecting watershed and minimizing development. That's helped to keep down the PFAS. And we have less development in the northern watershed. Well, guess what? PFAS levels, are lower in the northern watershed than they are in Westminster because, we have fewer major roads and houses in general, so you can see the difference that it makes. So we're fortunate we don't have, a large, I hope not, a large source of PFAS, some type of shop or something like that was in the watershed. Fortunately, industrial development in Westminster is not in our watershed. It's all, toward Route 2. So hopefully we continue at those levels. We monitor them quarterly, and we'd let you know if anything changed. But that 4 parts per trillion threshold is very low, and we're a little bit below it. But the trends that we've seen with ours is that we're going to be okay, hopefully. But if it's not, we could be facing a huge expense, and there's just no monies out there. They have the state revolving fund. It's funded by federal money, which may or may not be cut, but that's just a low interest loan. It doesn't actually give you a grant or anything like that. There may be some loan forgiveness for Fitchburg, but we'd still have a good portion of that, and we'd have all the O&M too. So just concluding again, it's like we'd love to get all the PFAS out of there for the customers. But the bottom line also is, I've mentioned it before, is that this isn't their exposure. There's a little bit in here, but it's everything else in our environment. Your stain-resistant clothing, your Gore-Tex, your popcorn, you just throw in the microwave, your coffee cups, it's in everything. And this is, not a route of exposure that's causing any harm compared to everything out in our environment. We'd like to remove it all, but it's just not feasible. We can't remove every little piece that's out there. And this is an example of what it would cost to accomplish that. And it just, it's not cheap.
That's effectively the end of the presentation. Kind of now on to the more important part of what questions do you have that we might be able to answer?
Questions for Sam? What is the time frame? Oh. What is the time frame for this, the $21 million?
It's a couple years out, so we're looking at not completing the engineering and going out to bid toward the end of 2026 or spring of 2027, and then a year or two project after that. So it's a ways out. We are updating the water rate study. Some of this stuff has been pushed off because when we started seeing, we had anticipated some of this work, but we started looking at all the billing systems together. We said we're going to put a bigger project together, because if we try to accomplish these separate, it's going to be too costly, So that's what we're looking at. We will have an update. Nick, do you know when the rate study will be
I think we're shooting for ultimately giving the presentation to City Council sometime in September.
So we'll have an idea. We're just looking at, the borrowing rates have gone up, of course. The SRF funds, we're not sure about that with everything that's going on. So that may change some of the borrowing. And a lot of the SRF funds for drinking water have gone to PFAS mitigation projects. That's why we couldn't get it for some of our water main projects. The last thing we got was for the Oak Hill storage tank, but we applied for Meeting House, Gatehouse, Merrimack. We've applied for all those, but just, that tier of money that we just fell out of was going toward PFAS projects all across the state. So.
And obviously, once we're a little further along with the rate study, before we go to City Council, we'll come before the Water Wastewater Commission and present you with all the numbers and, get your feedback and incorporate feedback, look for your approval and whatnot. So this study, this capital project planning is built into the current rate structure. If you remember a couple of years ago, we voted a rate increase. That was a 5-year increase. I believe the last of that 5 years will be in 2027. It could be a year or so off, but the goal would be to work in the cost, this $21 million, into the next 5-year period of a rate increase.
Thank you.
We need to look at our overall loans, what's dropping off in the next couple of years, and what else we've are borrowing and stuff. So we need to balance it all out. So we're hoping it's not going to have significant impact. By putting it off for a couple of years. I hope that helps a bit too, because it allows us to get some of the other projects done and some of the, I think there's another loan or two that's dropping off previously. So till then, but before then.
Any other questions for Sam?
Any incentives through the utility companies if we flip over to gas versus oil?
I don't believe there's any incentives. I've talked to Unitel's actually a supplier out in Westminster, and we can connect there. It's not so easy to connect at the Falulah plant, but they would work as far as the connection based on paying for some of the costs. So, but as far as reduced rates or anything like that, that's not.
What about equipment costs?
I don't believe that's the case. We can acquire again. It depends on what the status of the programs are, but I know there's a lot of reductions or things going on because of the high rates, the high bills that people saw, so they're cutting back on some of the same programs that were funded through people's, those additional fees on people's bills. So. But no, we'll certainly look at that. Every time we look at a project, if there's something, helping with the VFDs or something like that, we try to get assistance with that type of thing. So,
it's called the bargaining process, right? We sit with them and say we're interested in using X amount a year.
Yep. Yep. And when we last
looked, business.
Yeah, when we last looked at it, they looked at like connecting to Falulah, because Falulah is quite a ways off from where the gas is, and they said that we couldn't. For regional, they'd pay to connect up to it. The actual construction cost, that was a couple of years ago. But at Falulah, it just wasn't feasible because they'd never recover, within whatever length of time they have, that they need to recover that amount. So, but it's still worth asking again, you know. We thought that maybe with Stony Brook and some of the other customers along Ridge Road, that would be helpful to them, but it just wasn't at the time financially feasible. So yeah, we try to, leverage that as much as possible. So, but looking at natural gas though, I mean, we have, at the regional plant as well as Falulah, we have these huge storage tanks, 5,000 gallon fuel oil storage tank that are, they're 20 to 30 years old. It's like, yeah, they were state of the art then, but they're probably gonna have to be upgraded. We have generators that run off, the home heating fuel, diesel fuel, pretty much the same thing. They're getting older. They've ran a bit at times, like during the ice storm and things like that, but they also run a lot just during the test and during the periodic outages that we have, during the winter or even during the summer when there's a storm. So, and just exercising them adds a lot of hours on, making sure they operate. So, when we talk about Falulah, here's an example of where, heating oil was cheap. And I've probably mentioned this before, but the Falulah plant, when they set up that HVAC system for the whole plant, is that they cool the air with the air handlers, cool the air to 60 degrees, and then there's a hot water line to each of the air valves or the units in the ceiling in each room or office or whatever. That reheats the air up to 67, 68 degrees, so it's super dry. It's fantastically dry, but we use a lot of oil. Even during the summer months, we're burning 100 gallons a day of oil up there. So we had Train do an evaluation a few years ago, and it was millions of dollars to completely redo the system. But what I want to do is, like, can we make some adjustments to the system so we don't need to have this perfectly dry air that's it's nice, but we can live with a little humidity. Can we just maybe lower that down to 66 degrees, and the reheaters bring it up to 68 or something? Because right now we're having a lot of the electronics to control those units. The training room's a good example, and I know some of you for meetings have been there, but a couple weeks ago we were in there for a meeting, and the air units in the ceiling are blowing out cold air that's not reheating the air, so we're getting like 60-degree air coming in there, and all of a sudden and it's 75 degrees out. The baseboard starts up, and that's cranking out heat. So I have to go over, shut it off. It's like, I don't want to be burning oil just to, they're fighting each other. So we're working on replacing some of those, because there's it doesn't have a whole building system that runs everything. It's they're individual units in the ceiling, and those controllers are gone. Even though you turn the thermostat or something like that, it's not setting the right, it's not setting the thing saying, hey, it's super cold out, we'll start the baseboard, open that valve. It just says, oh, it's kind of cold in here because the HVAC's going, so we're going to start to open the baseboard. It's not working correctly. So we need to do that because we're spending more than we should. So, and we're working on some of that stuff now, but we need to look at, what else we can do to, lessen cost up there without spending millions of dollars. I mean, because to recoup that wasn't possible a couple of years ago. Just, it's probably been 5 or 7 years when we had it looked at, but it was in like a 30-year recovery of the cost, and it's just, well, let's do some minor tweaks, make sure the system's running properly, maybe adjust some of the temperatures and maybe add some more controls so that, we can make things work right depending on the season, because right now there's no way to really change any settings with the season. So regional's a little more straightforward. They didn't have that type of system for whatever reason, but I don't know, they got fancy with that one, and sometimes fancy isn't good over the long haul. It's all right when oil was whatever a gallon back in 2000 or whatever, but not now. Not that it's, like I said, as high as it has been, and historically the highs, but it still adds up when you burn 100 gallons a day. So
any water movement that we could use hydro?
We do have some. We basically use all the electricity that we can generate from at the Narrows Road. We did that through that grant program from Mass DEP and the state, but that's still, compared to some of the other, that's a lot of water that goes through to the city every day, but it's still not enough the other. And the thing is like we've had them look at the other reservoirs, but typically during the summer months we draw them down and they're no longer going over the spillway when you need that water. So just with that unpredictability, if we didn't use those reservoirs, especially the ones with a higher head for water supply, then yes, it's something that might be feasible, because we could, open up a valve and drain the reservoir and keep running water, as long as we can add water, but we need it for drinking water. So particularly when there is a drought. So
We also had a developer come in a couple of years ago and looked at our reservoirs and dams and whatnot. And in order to move forward with some of the incentives that his company was offering, we'd have to sign over water rights to the company for like 100 years. And we didn't feel comfortable signing away the rights to the city's drinking water. We thought that was a bad deal. So.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Sam? Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
So after this, it's going to be a while before you hear any more on this. I just wanted to let you know where we're at. So, the next thing will be probably, the rate study talking about it again. So, what the impact will be on future rates. And hopefully our PFAS continue to be below the limits. We'll cross our fingers because that would be an expensive thing to mitigate. So,
John, you're going to bring us up to date on the Main Street?
Yep, sure. Some of you have been through the traffic jam and the destruction construction, but they're getting around the Upper Common. They came around the southerly side and up to Rollstone, and they're going to head down Main Street. They're installing 2 water mains, a high and low system mains, as they're doing this. So. Hopefully by sometime next week they'll be down to Boulder Drive and make a connection there. They'll probably they're doing some pressure testing on Friday on some sections of the pipe around the Upper Common. But once those are all pressure tested and disinfected, they can start doing the services. And then once all the services are done, they can start picking up the temporary in that section. They already have the temporary done in the next section. So they're a little bit behind. There was a little hiccups in the beginning as far as valves and getting things to hold water. Valves that held last year didn't hold this year, and they're many decades old. So that's to be expected. And one time it works, and the next time it doesn't. But I think they made some pretty good progress this week, and have been the last 2 weeks actually. And hopefully we'll start moving along more quickly. But besides Lower Main Street. Warren Square, this is really the most difficult part of the project. Even down there is nothing compared to up here, so things should go along more quickly. And once we're past City Hall and Boulder, I think that's going to allow traffic movement to be more fluid than it is when they're working right now. So they've also done, for some reason, I don't know, I'll have to talk to one of my predecessors, but there's 2 water mains left in service on Lunenburg Street, so they put a new water main and never abandoned the old water main, and left like a couple services and like 3 hydrants still connected to it. So there's plenty of hydrants down there. That's why there's an excess. But so we've abandoned that section as part of this project. It's like, let's get out of service. We don't want to break on a main that we don't need. We have a new main that was installed in, I forgot what year, but not that long ago, probably within the last 30 years. They've connected over the couple services that were still connected to it, and we're working. I think they've abandoned pretty much the whole thing, and they're just going to remove the last couple hydrants. So we're going to put 1 new hydrant in, I believe. There'll still be like I said, plenty of hydrants down there, but like I said, they left them all in service and installed the new ones, and then just never finished it, abandoned that main. So. That'll make the tie-in down at Lunenburg and Summer easier at Main Street, because we don't have to tie in as much, shorten up some lengths of main, so and eliminate that that older section of main as a potential break issue. I can't think of anything else right now with the project. It's the hiccups have really, the last couple of weeks have gone pretty smooth. Once we got through some of this initial part and getting things shut down and doing a loop around the Upper Common. So I know it's certainly disruptive. I don't want to say it's not disruptive. It is, but it's necessary, and they've been doing pretty good job of getting things paved, the trenches paved and stuff, and making sure everything's set before the weekend. So the 4th of July week, they'll make sure everything's cleaned up so that, even though the celebration is pretty much molded out in the Boulder, we're going to be not working up in this area, and they're going to clean everything up and, get everything kind of out of the way so that, we're not in the way of people getting in and out of the city for that event. So anything you can add, Nick, or?
No, I think you pretty much got everything. The most disruptive portion right now is just trying to get around the Upper Common because of the traffic controls needed to direct traffic around the work. Once we get down into Middle and Lower Main Street, it'll be a little bit easier because we'll be able to detour block by block as the work progresses.
Yeah, any questions at all, or?
Any questions for John?
Yeah, I think people have kind of grown accustomed to it, although it's not pleasant or whatever, and I think we really tried to minimize the disruption to businesses as far as, water shutdowns and things like that. There were some impacts. There wasn't anything we could, completely avoid, but we tried to work around everybody, and I think it went all right, so, for the most part, so. Last item I have on my list, if there's no questions, the FY26 budget, we put it on the agenda. I know there's some cuts proposed last week by city council members or a member. Those were withdrawn, and the budget was approved, so everything's set. I will add that, the cuts that were proposed, we're not going to change a needle on water rates or, anything like that, so we're still, have to have the rates that, we've got programmed in. So, and it would have just really impacted our ability to do, some of the things that we need to do. Some years, I just want to talk about a couple items. Sometimes in our budget, I don't spend all of a line item, because in a grouping of budget items, if we stay in the positive, we don't have to worry about transferring money. And I do have to transfer some money coming up for overtime and for some capital, some work that was done because of the issues we had on Route 2 and some other breaks that we had to have a contractor come in. But if we can keep that grouping of line items positive, we don't have to worry about transferring money into there. And sometimes you can cut back on one when one goes over. So having said that, it's like I still want that money for next year. One is a building maintenance. I have one that, I didn't spend as much money as I thought because, I'd wanted to because a couple of the other line items are going over. It's like, I unfortunately still have to do transfers. I was hoping not to have to do any, but just that's what happened. And we always have to do transfers for overtime regardless. But next year, I still want to there's a couple roofs I want to get done on gatehouses. Besides the school department, the water department has more buildings than anybody else. When you add them all up between the storage tanks and the larger buildings, we have 28 buildings, with all the gatehouses. And guess what? Almost every year, one of them needs a roof, and fortunately, one plus that we have is that purchasing is able to put together an on-call list of roofing contractors so we can call out for these smaller projects if they're under $50,000. A couple roof projects we've done in the past have been $30,000 each. Montchusett pump station and the La Cava pump station, able to get those done. Going out to bid and doing all that stuff would actually cost more than just hiring somebody, getting a price from those street contractors and going with the best one. So, but like I said, sometimes you underspend. There's a couple line items that I haven't spent at all, and I'm sure other departments have too, because we're looking at our budgets and trying to balance things out. It's kind of like, you have a house and then you suddenly need a roof. Well, guess what? You may not be buying a new car that year. You're going to save that money because it's like, I got to fix my roof. So we kind of go through the same thing. So, but at the same time, we budget those line items like in anticipation of projects. That's pretty much what I wanted to convey. So,
Thank you.
any questions at all?
Any questions?
Just wondering where the money tree is.
Yeah.
It falls from the sky, as some of our customers tell us.
Yeah, and just to add for the viewing public, the rates that we set are mostly driven by capital improvements and capital needs. Like the daily operation and maintenance costs that John has really don't change the needle on where the rates fall. So if we cut back a little on, say, gas and oil or overtime or one of those other line items in the annual budget, it's not going to make an appreciable difference on the rates that people pay. The rates that people pay are really funding the water main improvements, the upgrades to the plant. I mean, you saw the presentation we just went through, that $21 million. That's
Servicing that debt, yeah.
Yeah, that's the stuff that really makes the rates be at where they're at, really.
Yeah. Yeah, we're not adding, 20 people or going up and down employment. We've been the same for 10 years now, nothing's changed or whatever. Of course, health insurance costs go up as it does for everybody, so that has an impact on what we have to, pay to the city in indirect costs because they need to cover their costs. So, but like Nick said, it's the capital and all the, electricity and things like that to run the plants, chemical costs and, yeah, there is labor costs, but it's those other things that really drive that, because we're really at the minimum number of people that we need to run the water, the water system. So,
Thank you, John. Mark.
All right.
Now we'll get to wastewater. Sorry about that. I do that every month.
I'll try to be quick. I'm sensitive to the next people that are waiting. CSO project updates. The first one I have is a CSO that we've been dealing with for the past year and a half, CSO 10. CSO 10 happens to deal with the sewer separation in the Upper Main Street, Arlington Street area. That project is 86% completed right now. So what we have left are 2 trenchless liners, and then the final curb-to-curb paving is really all that remains on that project. After that, we have quite a substantial time to do monitoring to make sure that the separation that has been completed is performing the way it's supposed to. And we've had a very rainy spring this year, and I can say that all the CSOs that have been separated, we haven't seen any of them being activated. So the work that's being done is working. The paving, we did a site walkthrough on Monday, and we looked at all the areas that was on the schedule to be paved, and we looked at places that needed special attention with curbing or, the curvature of the road or special areas. So that's going to probably be kicking off in the next couple of weeks. So once that's done, this project will be substantially completed. The next project is CSO 32. That's the one that started in last November. We are 18% completed on that. CSO 32 is the project in the Prospect, Elm Street, and Mechanic Street area. So all the work that's going on right there. There's been new drainage installed on Elm Street, Academy Street, and Johnson Street. And there will be continuing work in those areas for the next few weeks. This project is going to be going on to approximately next fall of 2026. So it's a long-term project. And while this is going on, I have my next project, CSO 4583. So that's the Main Street, Pritchard Street, and the Pleasant Street area. So that's the next one that's going to be coming up. It's scheduled to go out to bid probably late July, early August. And then once the bid's awarded, we can set a schedule when that one will begin. So we're quite busy with CSOs over the next 3 years or so. And then once this is done, we'll move on to the next area. Any questions on the CSOs?
Questions? Looks like you're good.
Okay. Staffing issues. A topic I seem to be bringing up quite regularly. We're still having problems finding licensed grade 6 operators down the plant. And we're not the only ones that have this problem. And because of this, we've had to transfer some of our money from our operating account over to the overtime account because we've been using so much overtime with the operators filling in the vacancies. In the meantime, what we've been trying to do to alleviate this problem, we're looking how we can reach out and find somebody. So what we're doing is we're looking at other municipalities, seeing what they're doing to hire people. We're continuing to advertise on wastewater job recruiting sites. We do get some applicants, but nobody with the proper license. We're looking at what incentives we can offer new hires. Maybe there's something we can do differently that will be more attractive to them. And lastly, I mentioned this before, we have one of our on-call engineering firms, Arcadis. They have been doing a study down the treatment plant, finding out what will it take for us to reduce the hours that people work there. So automated at nighttime and on the weekends. So we're looking at possible ways of adding additional alarms, maybe on-call equipment that'll help satisfy any concerns that the DEP may have, because anything that we put together has to be run through them for approval. In the meantime, the plant staff have been, they've been stepping up. They're meeting the challenge of the long days and nights, and they've been doing a very good job down there. Any questions on the staffing?
Questions?
Budget updates. Like John, I put it on the agenda as a placeholder, just in case we had to bring up, because we were presented with budget cuts. Wastewater was facing a $1.32 million potential cut. And those are in various areas, mostly within the architectural engineering line. That one really got mentioned. So luckily, those were withdrawn on June 11th. The budget got passed last night. That's all good. I put it here just in case, because if those cuts did go through, then in my job to inform you guys what are the ramifications if those cuts went through, and they are substantial and very big. If we violate our consent decree, I'd have to notify them within 72 hours of finding out what the problem is, and so that would have been an issue. Luckily, we don't have that issue. Budget was passed, was good. Any questions on the budget? The last item I have is the West Plant repurposing project. As we mentioned in the past, there was a proposal to transform and repurpose our old West Fitchburg wastewater treatment plant up on Route 31 that was built and designed for the paper mills at the time. Sitting there doing nothing. We were hoping that we could have it transformed into a anaerobic digester. Well, that project now has been canceled. On May 15th, we had to send out a letter to Rollstone Renewable Energy withdrawing their RFP request for proposal because they couldn't find investors due to the current issues like permitting process within Massachusetts was becoming difficult. The PFAS risks were a big unknown question, and the tax credits got removed out of the federal budget. And so because of all that, the investors got cold feet, they backed out, and so we had to withdraw our offer. So what we're going to do now is we're looking at the next steps, what they may be, and what directions that we can go that's best for the city, maybe using some of the property down the existing treatment plant with the old incinerator. We're looking at all options right now to see, because we do have an issue with where we're going to bring our sludge one day. The landfill does have a life limit that's coming up on us, and like other municipalities, we still produce sludge all the time, and so we're going to have to find a way of getting rid of it. Okay? That's what I have. Any questions?
Questions?
Yeah, can I just ask, you said the sludge limit's coming up, but what is coming up?
The life term of the landfill. That's where we bring all our sludge right now. And so at one point, the landfill is going to be capped and we can't bring it there anymore.
But we don't know when that is yet.
Do we have a date?
The last I heard was 2032, I believe, with the most recent, I think they just approved a vertical expansion for the landfill. Those estimates are pretty rough. I think the last estimate that we got was 2017 or something like that, and the landfill's still open, so
yeah.
2032 will likely stretch a little bit beyond that, but the reality is at some point the landfill will close. We'll have to find another place to bring our residuals. There's not many other places in Massachusetts left for that. Mm-hmm. Other cities and towns in Massachusetts are going to pay big dollars to dispose out of state. I think Brockton just had a $1 or $2 million hit to their budget because they signed a contract for out-of-state disposal. So it behooves us to figure out a solution that is going to solve our issue and then generate some revenue for us too by solving other surrounding communities and towns' issues. So that's the idea behind looking at the East Plant, seeing if there's something we can do down there on a smaller scale. Maybe there's still something we can do at the West Plant that's going to require a little bit of a different approach. One of the things we're considering is looking at potentially going ahead with public financing, and that was the reason why our project didn't move forward, because it was private investment, private equity, and that just isn't going to work in this kind of climate. But if we could figure out a way to publicly finance the project, that eliminates that from the equation. So there's some steps that we can take to make that happen. It's a little bit convoluted and complicated. I don't really want to get into it in this meeting. Once we have a little bit of a clearer picture and a more of a clear path forward, I think we'll bring something back to you. But I think Mark was just trying to make it all known to you all that we still get our thinking caps on. We're still trying to figure this out. The project's dead, but the goal is still very much the same.
Thank you.
Does Waste Management have permanent rights to the use of that landfill?
I think they do. I don't know the details of the contract between Waste Management and the city, but my understanding is that they've got control of the landfill until that 2032 deadline. I don't know really the details or if there's any way out of it for the city, but that's my understanding to this point.
So if we had retained control of it, would have a place to bring everything probably for many, many years.
Many, maybe.
Probably. I don't know the details of that as far as, being able to have city staff operate and do the rubbish collection like we used to. There's probably a lot more nuance to it, but if the city still maintained control, I'm sure we could limit other uses being brought into the landfill and then make sure we have room for ourselves for a longer period of time.
That's the point. Oh, well.
Yeah, we have to find something. The first one who finds the answer in this area is going to win the prize because there's a lot of towns looking to bring their sludge somewhere.
Right.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, that ends the agenda for this.
I just have one thing. I know Joe had asked about having a tour of the water treatment facilities, and I'd like to bring out to the reservoirs too in the southern watershed. What I'd like to do, kind of part of this project too, is just to give you an understanding of the regional plan, go through there. I was hoping, I'm going to reach out to City Council too. Of course, we can't have a quorum. I don't have to worry about that with City Council because there's 11 members or whatever. But so 2 or 3 from the commission, if anybody's interested, I'd like to try to coordinate something like that. I mean, it honestly will take at least a half day. Maybe a touch over, 4 hours, 5 hours to go through things in the southern watershed. I'd like to do both watersheds, and both plants, but that'd be a whole day easily. So I don't think people realize how far our water, our system stretches. So, if you want to just drop an email to me, I'm going to reach out to City Council and try to get, I'd like to get 2 or 3 city councilors, 2 or 3, keep it under a quorum for the commission, of course, so we don't have to post it and have it as a public meeting, but we can try to work on coordinating that in the next few weeks. I think it'd be helpful, particularly, go through the regional plan after, looking at the watershed and the dams in the southern watershed and see our Meeting House project too and our Mare Meadow project that's going to be going on. I think it'd be helpful to kind of understand what we're facing with the regional plant going through there, Our guys have done a great job maintaining it, but it's come to a point where it requires, specialized planning and work to rehab the stuff and, keep that plant running at the same time. So yeah, anybody's interested, just drop me an email and we'll work on coordinate that. And then the next few weeks, and like I said, I'm going to, send something out to City Council, and we can do a couple groups. It isn't one-time thing, so if we do one in the next few weeks and another later in the summer or something, if everybody wants to go, we'll get you all through a tour of that in the next couple months. Okay.
Good.
Thank you.
John. If there's no other business, the next meeting will be July 16th here at 5 o'clock. No other business. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
We are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.